My name is Olivia, I am 62 years old, and for the last 2 decades, I have lived 2 different lives. To the world, I was invisible, the woman behind the curtains. To my daughter, I was something worse, her servant. I cooked, cleaned, ironed dresses, answered phone calls, and stood quietly in the corner while she basked in the light. Tomorrow is her birthday gala, 40 guests at a 5-star hotel. She smirked at me earlier, her tone sweet but sharp as glass. It's only 40 guests. Just put it on your card. She expected me to bow, to plan, to pay, to praise. She thought my silence meant obedience. What she didn't know is that tomorrow, when she walks into that ballroom, her jaw will drop. And the real surprise will still be waiting. For 20 years, I have swallowed her commands like bitter pills. I smiled when she demanded, nodded when she dismissed me, and stayed quiet when her husband laughed at me. She called it love. I called it duty. But I knew in my bones that I had become her unpaid servant mother, someone she paraded around when convenient and hid when she felt embarrassed. My hands carried the weight of her world, while my own heart grew heavier with every passing year. I think about the times she handed me her shopping bags without a glance, or the day at her wedding when she told the maitre d', "That's my mother." Just treat her like staff. I think about the way Victor, her husband, whispered at the table, loud enough for me to hear, "She should be grateful to have a roof." Those words carved scars no one could see. I bore them all, telling myself it was family, that a mother's job was to endure. But endurance has a breaking point. I learned that when I stood in the empty ballroom last week, checking the space she had chosen. I could almost hear the echoes of her laughter, her friends praising the grandeur she didn't earn, all bought with the credit she expected me to offer. My reflection in the tall mirrors didn't look like a servant. It looked like a woman who had been waiting for the right moment. And so, tomorrow is not just her birthday gala. It is the day everything shifts. She believes she owns me, that I exist to carry her through her life's performances. But she has no idea that the script has already been rewritten. She will walk into a room expecting applause, and instead she will face silence. The absence of prepared flowers, the missing trays of hors d'oeuvres, the bare tables will speak louder than I ever could. And in that silence, she will see me. Not the servant mother, but the woman who chose to stop bowing. Before I tell you how I reached this point, I want to invite you to stay with me through the rest of this story. What happened at that gala wasn't just revenge. It was the moment I reclaimed my worth, the moment I drew a line no one could cross again. If you've ever felt unseen, dismissed, or treated as less by the people who should have loved you most, then this story is for you. Share where you are watching from, join me as I retrace these steps, and maybe you will see pieces of your own journey mirrored in mine. Because what I discovered is simple. Respect is not a gift you beg for. It is a boundary you draw. Now let me take you back to the command that set everything in motion. The next morning, Diana swept into my kitchen without knocking, as if the house belonged to her. She wore a silk blouse the color of champagne, her hair polished into perfection, and her eyes carrying the same disdain that had lingered there for years. She didn't even greet me. She dropped a thick folder onto the table with a sound that startled the quiet morning air. "It's just 40 guests," she said casually, as though it were the simplest thing in the world. "Put it on your card." Her tone was sharp, the same tone she used when speaking to caterers or assistants. She looked straight through me, not at me, and her lips curled in that way she had whenever she thought she was being clever. I stared at the folder. Inside were lists of menus, flower arrangements, guest names, and special requests. She had penciled her notes in the margins. Make sure the wine is vintage. Order a harpist. Double-check the ice sculptures. I knew this handwriting well. It was the handwriting of a daughter who never questioned whether I would obey. I raised my eyes to her, but before I could speak, she was already pacing the room, rattling off more instructions. Oh, and remember, the gala is not about you. Just make sure everything goes smoothly, like you always do. You're good at that." She paused to check her reflection in the kitchen window. Her words sliced me open, though I kept my face calm. In her mind, I was not her mother, but her personal staff. My years of silence had trained her into believing it was her right. My heart pounded, not from fear anymore, but from the strange clarity that comes when you finally recognize the line that has been crossed too many times. She thought I would nod, pull out my credit card, and handle every detail as I always had. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us, thick as the air before a storm. The folder remained on the table, untouched. She tapped it with her manicured nail. "Well, don't just sit there. We don't have much time." The hotel needs confirmation today. I thought about telling her then and there who I really was, what I had built, how little she understood about the woman she called mother. But I didn't. Not yet. Timing matters. What she could not see was that my phone on the counter was glowing with an unread email. Hours earlier, before she arrived, a message had come from Eleanor Wu, the CEO of one of the most exclusive hotel groups in New York. Eleanor's words were simple, but weighty. "Looking forward to finalizing the $5 million consulting deal this week. Your leadership has impressed our board. Let's meet Monday to..." Sign. I had read those lines twice, savoring the respect they carried. Respect my daughter had never once offered me. Respect I had earned without her knowledge. As Diana strutted around my kitchen, barking her orders, I let my eyes drift to the email again, glowing like a small secret flame. To her, I was nothing more than the servant mother. To Eleanor, I was the head of Aurora Consulting, a woman trusted with the growth of an empire. That contrast struck me harder than ever before, and it steadied me. Diana finally leaned across the table, her perfume overwhelming, her eyes demanding. "So, are you going to handle this or not? I can't be embarrassed in front of my friends. You know how important this is for me." Her voice cracked with entitlement, but beneath it, I heard something else. Fear. Fear of being ordinary. Fear of standing without me to hold her up. For a brief second, I saw the little girl she once was, clutching at me when she felt lost. Then the moment passed, replaced by the hardened woman who expected me to pay for her stage. I folded my hands together and smiled, not out of obedience, but because I knew something she didn't. I let her think her words still held power. My smile made her impatient. "Mother," she snapped, "are you even listening?" I nodded slowly, carefully, as though agreeing. But in my heart, I was already somewhere else, already preparing for the moment when her assumptions would crumble. She mistook my silence for surrender, but it was the calm before the reckoning. I walked her to the door without promising a thing. She left in a swirl of perfume and silk, convinced the gala was secure, convinced I would carry the burden yet again. The house grew quiet when the door closed, and I turned back to the table where the folder still lay. My phone buzzed with a new message, a confirmation from Eleanor's assistant. The contrast could not have been sharper. My daughter's demands on one side, and a powerful woman's respect on the other. For the first time in years, I felt something bloom in my chest. Not resentment, not grief, but possibility. What Diana could never imagine was that the story she thought she was directing was no longer hers to control. Tomorrow she would learn that the woman she treated like a servant was capable of choosing her own script. My name is Olivia, and when I rewind my life, the memories don't play like a film. They snap like a string of photographs, quick and unforgiving. The first is Diana's wedding morning. I arrived before sunrise with garment bags, steamed her veil, and solved the seating chart. When the maitre d' asked who I was, Diana smiled without looking at me. "She's staff," she said, as if the word were obvious. 3 summers later, a walk-up apartment during a heat wave. Diana called at dawn. "We got the keys early. Can you come?" I hauled boxes up 4 flights while she directed with a coffee cup. The movers needed a signature. She pointed to me. She handles that. I signed, paid for the extra hour, bought lunch so we wouldn't look cheap, and watched her post a photo captioned, "New Beginnings." A spring brunch at her house. I arrived early to open the house, baked quiches, rinsed berries, arranged roses in a pitcher her grandmother left me. She swept in 40 minutes late and said, "Mom, take coats." And I stood at the door for 2 hours with a smile that hurt. After the last guest left, she kissed my cheek and whispered, "Perfect, as always," the way people praise service. At Emily's 3rd grade recital, I brought flowers and a camera. Diana handed me her tote and vanished toward the music teacher. A woman I recognized tilted her head. "Are you the nanny?" "You're so good with the child," I held the words I wanted to say. Later, Diana posted a photo captioned "Proud Parents." I took the picture. I wasn't in it. The smaller memories pile up. Birthdays I baked for and never tasted. Holidays where I ironed tablecloths no one noticed. Sick days with a cool cloth on Diana's forehead. While she complained, the curtains made the light look old. Texts arrived at midnight. "Can you send money for the deposit? Can you pick up Emily at 7? Can you fix the centerpiece? Victor invited partners?" My replies were hands, not words. The quiet inside me thickened like winter air. A charity event she wanted in 2 weeks. "You know everyone," she said, tossing me a list that trailed off the page. I negotiated with vendors and drafted notes she would sign without reading. On the night, she shimmered like ice and leaned in to ask, "You didn't wear anything too loud, did you?" Later, Victor raised a glass. Here's to Diana's flawless taste and to her mother, who never needs the spotlight. Laughter rose like steam. The hospital the day Emily was born is the only soft space. Diana crushed color from my fingers and begged me not to leave. When the nurse asked who I was, she said, "She's family." And for a few hours, the word felt unbroken. Weeks later, hollowed out by sleeplessness, she snapped, "Why can't you anticipate?" I anticipated everything and still managed to be wrong. A grocery store aisle. A friend congratulated Diana on a dinner party and asked who catered. "A place my mother uses," she said, and I felt myself collapse into a nameless address, a number you call when you need more ice. I reached for butter and told myself it didn't matter. The boutique. She tried on a camel coat, beautiful and costly. "It's a bit steep," she murmured, admiring herself. She handed me the receipt to file, which meant pay and forget. I did. She wore it through the season and gave it to a friend. "She needs it more," she said. "You don't go anywhere that fancy." She was right about the rooms I entered, wrong about the woman who walked into them. One afternoon at the library, Emily and I sat on the rug, building a tower of picture books. "Grandma," she asked, "why does Mom get mad at you?" I told her some people confuse help with permission. "What's permission?" she said. "A little door," I answered, "that you keep the key to." She placed her hand over mine like she was covering a keyhole and nodded as if she understood a map I hadn't taught her yet. There were school auctions where I donated consulting hours under a generic label because Diana wanted the prestige without the association. "It's cleaner," she said. Clean became another word for unseen. I learned to tuck my name into the lining of things and walk away. Late nights, my phone pulsed with requests I answered before I was fully awake. I said yes so often the word felt borrowed. The last memory is quieter than the rest. I was wiping a latte ring from Diana's counter when she said, "Smile more. You look severe when you don't." I caught my reflection in the microwave door, a woman whose face had learned not to want. I rinsed the cloth and wrung it out until the water ran clear. Something small and stubborn inside me lifted its head. I didn't argue. I put the cloth away and stepped outside under a sky so open it made my lungs ache. When I lay down that night, I didn't replay the insults. I pictured a key, cool in my hand, and a door inside me that had rusted from disuse. I slept for 6 hours and woke knowing the real had changed. Watching these cuts in order, I felt grief first, for the girl I let my daughter stop seeing. Then I felt a steadier thing, the click of a lock opening from the inside. I have been many useful shapes. I can be another. I won't raise my voice. I won't beg to be seen. I'll simply rearrange the room. I am ready to step out of the montage and into the life no one believes I have. Tomorrow I will stop carrying what is not mine, and the woman my daughter calls servant will meet the woman I let the world see when she isn't looking. I will be ready then. Most people, even those closest to my family, never knew what I did when I stepped out of my quiet house each morning. They assumed I spent my days running errands, clipping coupons, or waiting by the phone for Diana to call. In truth, I took the train downtown, walked into a glass tower where the elevators whispered past 50 floors, and unlocked the door to an office that carried my name, Aurora Consulting. I built it 25 years ago from nothing more than a borrowed desk and a conviction that clear strategy could save companies from ruin. Today, it is worth tens of millions, with clients that stretch across industries, from technology to hospitality. I remember the first time I walked into the current headquarters. Marble floors, high windows, a reception desk polished until it glowed. Employees in sharp suits greeted me as Miss Whitfield, though I rarely encouraged formality. To them, I was not someone's mother. I was the founder who carried them through market crashes, acquisitions, and the sleepless nights that follow large deals. I was the leader who could stare at spreadsheets until numbers began to confess their secrets. And unlike at home, every nod in that building carried respect. Marcus, my COO, has been by my side for over a decade. He is sharp-eyed, measured, and fiercely loyal. When he walks into my office with his notepad and his calm presence, I feel the ground steady beneath me. That morning, the one after Diana had handed me her gala folder, he entered with a quiet grin. "Eleanor Wu confirmed," he said, placing a folder in front of me. $5 million. They're ready to sign. I opened the file and saw the numbers, the projections, the promise of another success that would keep Aurora's name gleaming in the business pages. I thought about the irony of it all. While my daughter treated me as though I were nothing, one of the most powerful women in the hospitality industry trusted me to shape the future of her empire. Eleanor is not a woman easily impressed. She built her hotels on precision, discipline, and a refusal to settle for mediocrity. In our meetings, she spoke with clarity and listened without interruption. I admired her, not just for her empire, but for her fairness. She never asked if I had time between family obligations. She never assumed my work was secondary. To her, I was a peer. Her latest email carried a note that struck me. "Your perspective always cuts through the noise. We need that now more than ever." Those words lodged deep inside me, not because they flattered, but because they acknowledged. I sat at my desk, surrounded by framed certificates and photographs of teams celebrating victories, and I let my mind drift back to Diana's command, "Put it on your card." The same mouth that dismissed me as staff had no idea that I managed accounts larger than her entire annual income. She had never asked what I did each day, never cared where I went once I left the house. Perhaps she thought I was running errands for her even when I was closing international contracts. She lived in a world where I was useful only in relation to her. That blindness had become her weakness, and I no longer felt the need to correct it. The city stretched outside my window, endless gray spires, each carrying a story of ambition and survival. I watched people hurry across crosswalks, clutching briefcases and phones, and I felt myself among them. Not as a mother trailing behind, but as a woman who had carved a place in this restless skyline. It was a different kind of family here, one I had chosen and built with deliberate care. My employees respected me, not because they had to, but because they had watched me fight through storms and never surrender. That afternoon, Marcus briefed me on upcoming negotiations, and I signed a stack of documents that would guide Aurora into its next quarter. My pen didn't falter, my voice didn't waver, and my resolve only deepened. When the final signature dried, I leaned back in my chair and thought about tomorrow. Diana's gala, the ballroom, the 40 guests, the smirk she wore when she demanded I pay. She thought she held the reins. What she never realized is that I had been holding them all along, choosing carefully when to pull. By the time I left the office, the sky over Manhattan had shifted to gold. I walked out with my briefcase, passed by a group of interns whispering in admiration, and stepped into the evening with the certainty that no one could take this from me. At home, I might be the silent mother who endured slights. But here, I was the architect of an empire. That duality had been my secret armor, and tomorrow it would become the key to my liberation. 2 evenings before the gala, Diana appeared at my doorstep without warning. Her heels clicked against the hardwood, her perfume arriving before her words. Victor followed a few steps behind, scrolling on his phone as though even standing in my home were a chore. Diana carried another folder, heavier than the first, and she dropped it on my dining table with a thud that made the chandelier above tremble. "This is the guest list," she announced. 40 confirmed, plus a few who might bring guests. "Don't embarrass me, Mother. Everything needs to be perfect." Victor glanced up long enough to smirk. "She means flawless," he said, his voice dripping with that familiar sarcasm. "You wouldn't want people thinking Diana doesn't know how to host." "They already assume enough, don't they?" He returned to his phone as though his words carried no weight, but I felt their sting. For years, I had let those little daggers pierce me in silence. This time, I let them float past, refusing to grant them the satisfaction of landing. Diana pulled out a handwritten list of vendors: florists, musicians, caterers, lighting specialists. Call them. Book them. Make sure they know it's me hosting, not you, and don't you dare cut corners. Her eyes narrowed as if daring me to resist. "If you can't manage it, then don't bother showing up. You're either on my side or you're not my mother." The words hung between us like smoke. I felt Victor watching, waiting for my reaction. He leaned back in his chair, his arm draped lazily over the backrest, confident I would cave as always. Diana's gaze was sharp, challenging, and I realized she truly believed she could threaten me into obedience. My fingers brushed against the edge of a folder sitting near me on the table. The Aurora contract with Eleanor Wu's signature waiting. The weight of that folder steadied me, reminding me of who I truly was. I looked at Diana, her chin tilted high, her certainty unshaken. For a moment, I saw her as a child again, stomping her foot when I refused to buy her another toy. But this was no toy. This was power, respect, and dignity. She wanted me cornered, wanted me to feel as though her approval was the only thing that mattered. What she never understood is that I had stopped needing her approval a long time ago. I folded my hands in my lap and let a small smile form, not the smile of surrender, but of quiet resolve. Diana misread it instantly. She believed it meant compliance, that she had won. Her shoulders relaxed, her mouth curved upward with triumph. "Good," she said briskly, gathering her papers. "I'll expect updates tomorrow." Victor chuckled under his breath. "See? She always comes around." He put his phone away at last and stood, brushing imaginary dust from his jacket sleeve. "You'd be lost without us, wouldn't you?" The arrogance in his tone might have angered me once. Now it only confirmed what I already knew. Their world was built on the assumption that I would always bend. They left with the same carelessness they had entered. Diana's heels clicking down the front steps, Victor's laughter fading into the night. I closed the door softly behind them and stood in the quiet, the house holding its breath. On the table sat 2 folders, one filled with demands, the other with possibilities. My daughter thought she had cornered me with her ultimatum, but in truth, she had freed me. Her threat severed the last tether I had to her approval. I picked up the Aurora folder, opened it, and traced my finger along the neat columns of figures. Each line represented trust, respect, recognition, the things my daughter refused to give me. My smile deepened, not for her but for myself, for the life I had chosen and the woman I had built away from her shadow. I knew then that the gala would not unfold the way she imagined. She would walk into that ballroom expecting adoration, and what she would find instead was emptiness, a reflection of how she had treated me all these years. The chandelier above swayed gently as if agreeing with my decision. I closed both folders, one atop the other, and carried them to my study. Tomorrow I would begin preparing for the only event that mattered, the moment I stopped being her servant and reclaimed my place as something she had never allowed herself to see, her equal, and beyond that, her teacher. That night the house was so still that I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, each second a small hammer against the silence. I sat at the dining table long after Diana and Victor had gone, staring at the two folders they had left behind in spirit, if not in presence. One carried her demands, the other carried my future. I ran my hands over the covers and felt the weight of my life press into me. For years I had chosen silence, thinking it was a kind of love, thinking endurance was the only way to keep the peace. But love without respect is only servitude, and peace built on humiliation is nothing but surrender. I opened the folder Diana had dropped and read through the list of vendors. It was endless. Florists, caterers, entertainers, decorators, all with notes scrawled in her sharp handwriting. She had even underlined the word perfection twice, as if daring me to fail. I traced the ink with my finger and then closed the folder. Next, I opened the Aurora contract, the one Eleanor Wu was waiting for me to sign. The contrast could not have been clearer. In one folder, I was treated as invisible, a tool to be used. In the other, I was recognized, trusted, and valued. The decision sat before me like a scale, and for the first time, I did not hesitate. I rose from the table, walked into my study, and laid Diana's folder flat on the desk. Beside it, I placed a single sheet of paper I had been working on for weeks, an emergency vendor list I had prepared long ago for my own team. It was basic, incomplete, missing the polish of a full plan, but it would suffice if someone truly cared to use it. I tucked the sheet inside the folder and closed it again. I knew Diana would see it as help, but to me, it was something else entirely. It was a mirror. If she wanted the gala to shine, she would need to work for it. I would no longer carry her weight. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my study. The bookshelves were lined with case studies, market reports, and memoirs of leaders I admired. The framed photographs of my staff at Aurora stared back at me, each face a reminder of battles fought and won. These were people who trusted me to make decisions that mattered, who thanked me when the work was done, who never mistook my silence for weakness. I thought of Marcus, always steady, always at my side, and Eleanor, whose respect had reminded me of my own worth. They knew me as Olivia Whitfield, CEO. Diana knew me only as mother, servant, scapegoat. Tomorrow, that split identity would end. The clock in the hallway struck midnight. I walked back to the table and picked up the Aurora folder, holding it close against my chest. It was more than contracts and numbers. It was proof of the life I had built, the life no one could take from me. I placed it carefully in my briefcase and locked it. The sound of the clasp closing was like a seal, a vow. I returned to the kitchen, turned off the lights, and paused at the window. Outside, the street was quiet, the lamplight spilling across the pavement. I thought about my late husband, about the advice he had once given me when our daughter was still a child. One day, you'll need to decide whether you live for her approval or your own truth. I had chosen wrong for years, burying my truth beneath her demands, but now I had chosen differently. When I finally climbed into bed, I felt no fear, only a deep and quiet certainty. Tomorrow, Diana would discover that I was not hers to command. She would walk into that ballroom and face the emptiness she had sown. She would come to understand that respect cannot be demanded by those who refuse to give it. For me, there was no going back. The decision was made, and my silence had turned into something unshakable. I closed my eyes and let the darkness hold me, knowing that morning would bring the first day of my freedom. The hotel's revolving doors released a cool breath as I stepped inside with nothing in my hands but my phone and a steadiness I had earned. The corridor to the grand ballroom smelled of citrus and polished wood. A cart of glassware chimed, a bellhop called out a room number, and the air held that bright, expectant hush hotels wear before a celebration. I reached the entrance and stopped. Tables stretched in neat rows, draped in plain linen, as bare as winter fields. No place settings, no flowers, no catering staff, no soft music floating from a speaker. The room looked like a stage built for applause that decided not to show. My phone vibrated in my bag. Diana. Then again. I let it quiet. A floor manager in a navy blazer appeared with a clipboard and the patience of someone trained to deliver bad news without bruising it. "Ma'am, are you with the host?" he asked. "We haven't received confirmations for banquet service or rentals." I nodded once. He glanced at the empty tables, tightened his jaw with professional restraint, and disappeared toward the kitchen. 5 minutes later, Victor strode in with his jacket open and his confidence already sliding. Diana followed in blush silk, shining as if applause should rise at her arrival. She stopped so fast her dress sighed around her. "What is this?" The manager returned and explained with measured care that no deposits had posted, no service orders had been finalized, and tentative staff had been reassigned to confirmed events. The words hung in the light like dust. Diana blinked hard. There must be a mistake. The manager offered a small, apologetic tilt of the head that meant this was not a mistake. This was a ledger. She rounded on Victor. "You said Mother had it." He shrugged, small and mean. "You said she always does." "Call her," Diana dialed, pacing tight circles that traced her panic. "Mother, pick up," she said to the ringing line. "Answer me." My bag hummed against my hip. I kept my hands at my sides and watched sunlight climb across the carpet, a gold bar inching toward the center of the room. Guests began to arrive in glittering pairs, speaking with the bright voices people use before they know what they have stepped into. The first couple stalled just inside the doorway, unsure where to place their smiles. "Is this minimalist?" a woman asked her husband, trying to make a joke sound like a compliment. Laughter rose and thinned. 2 men drifted to the windows and talked about the skyline while their eyes kept returning to the naked tables. Diana moved among them with a stretched smile and an explanation that kept changing shape. "There's been a delivery delay. We're trying a new format. Cocktails first." Each sentence frayed at the edges. I stood near a column and opened my email. A message from Eleanor's office sat at the top, a band of words that understood its own importance. Confirming Monday at 9. Board attending. Your deck is the clearest we have seen this quarter. The sentence steadied me like a hand at the small of my back. I slipped the phone away and looked up to see the manager offering Diana a short menu of last-minute options. A pared-down buffet if the kitchen could spare capacity, basic place settings pulled from storage, rental chairs if a truck could be turned around in time. Each option required time, deposits, and humility. Diana nodded too fast, then turned and demanded results faster than the laws of kitchens allow. Emily arrived with a friend's mother, her hair pinned with tiny pearls, her face bright with the hope children carry into rooms that do not deserve it. She took 3 quick steps toward Diana, then slowed as the emptiness explained itself. "Mom?" she asked. Diana smoothed her daughter's hair with shaking fingers. "It's fine, sweetheart." "We're making it cozy." Emily looked around, confused but brave, and then she found me. We held each other's eyes for a heartbeat. I gave her the smallest nod, a promise that nothing was wrong with her for noticing the truth. She squared her shoulders the way girls do when they are learning where to place their tenderness. The manager returned with facts no one could charm away. The florist was across town installing an arch that had been confirmed and paid for by someone who respected labor. The lighting crew was committed to another ballroom because no contract bound them here. The caterer needed hours, not minutes, to prepare anything worthy of the hotel's name. Guests checked watches and asked where to place gifts and coats that had no assigned chairs. A man near the door joked about pizza. The laughter that followed was too bright and gone too quickly. Victor stepped aside and made calls on speaker, bargaining in a voice meant to impress strangers who could not be bothered. One vendor quoted a rush fee so high he swore and hung up. He tried a credit card and then another, each decline pruning his bravado. The manager's expression stayed professionally gentle, though I saw the patience of someone who had rescued too many evenings from people who thought magic arrived without labor. Diana kept calling me while standing 15 feet away, as if the act itself might summon a solution. When she finally saw me by the column, relief flashed first, then anger, then pleading. She came close enough that I could smell her perfume. Why aren't the flowers here? Where is the food? Why isn't anyone setting the tables? I met her eyes and let the questions rest between us. You had the list, I said softly. You had the time. Her mouth opened and closed. For a moment, I saw the child who once needed me to tie her shoes and feared the world would start without her. Then the practiced smile returned, thinner than it had ever been. Please, she said, and the word cracked. It carried need but no respect. I reached into my bag and took out a single sheet of paper, the emergency vendor list I had tucked into her folder days ago. I placed it on the nearest table. Start here, I said. If you move quickly, you can build something small and honest. She stared at the names as if they were written in a language she had refused to learn. Victor joined us, overheated and impatient. Fix it, he said to me, as if I were a lever he could pull. You're good at this. Do the thing you do. I looked at him the way you look at a locked door you have decided not to open. You both had every chance, I said. He muttered about standards and stalked away to make another call. The room grew louder and emptier at the same time. Strange physics I knew well. Guests clustered near the hallway, forming little islands where speculation could bloom. A woman asked if there would be speeches. Another asked about a toast. Diana promised everything and received nothing in return. The chandeliers kept sparkling as if light were enough. I stood in that glittering absence and felt a calm I trusted. I would not exchange my dignity for borrowed applause. Not today. My phone buzzed again with a final confirmation from Eleanor's assistant. I typed a brief reply and slid the phone back into my bag. Diana lifted her head and tried once more. Do not leave, she said, and what she meant was, do not make me stand here as myself. I stayed where I was. I am here, I said, but I will not do this for you. She looked past me to the tables, to the paper on the linen, to the door where more guests hesitated. She picked up the list with shaking hands and began to dial. The first call went to voicemail. The second rang and rang. The third connected, and her voice, stripped of entitlement, finally filled the empty room. The boxes arrived before pride could. 20 minutes after Diana started calling every kitchen in a 10-mile radius, a delivery boy in a red cap pushed through the ballroom doors with towers of cardboard that leaned like fragile buildings. Garlic and oregano rushed in first, warm and unignorable, drowning the polite scent of lemon polish. Guests watched with the stunned fascination people reserve for small disasters. You know you should look away, and you simply can't. Diana was still on the phone, promising miracles to anyone willing to listen. Of course the floral arch is en route, she said, pacing a thin track into the carpet. Naturally, the quartet is warming up. Her reassurances shattered the moment they touched the room. Victor lurked near the service hall, flinging numbers at vendors like darts. A rush fee made him swear. A decline made him slap the wall and cough to bury the sound. He straightened his jacket and re-entered as if posture could set a table. The delivery boy hovered a step inside the threshold, unsure whether this kingdom allowed cardboard. I met him halfway and smiled. "Thank you," I said, and his shoulders dropped in. Relief. The manager, measured and merciful, waved 2 servers forward. They wheeled out crystal cake stands, silver tongs, and glass cloches that looked like small crowns. Steam rose when we opened the boxes, blessing a day that needed blessing. A server slid a glossy slice onto a crystal charger. It looked like a joke the universe had written, and still, it was food. Laughter started in little cracks. Shock first, then relief. "Only in this city," someone said. A woman in sequins angled her phone to catch the chandelier's glow above the humble triangle of cheese. The photo leapt from screen to screen in seconds, a spark skating dry grass. Diana saw the flicker of phones and seized a flute from a tray that held nothing but air. "Let's all mingle," she announced. Teeth bright, voice tight. The word mingle suddenly a bandage across a fracture. The kitchen sent up bowls for salads we did not have. The manager, saintly in patience, arranged monogrammed napkins around the improvised buffet. He murmured to a server who returned with mineral water, nesting in champagne buckets. "Optics," he said gently, and I gave him the smallest grateful nod. Emily drifted toward me with a friend from school, eyes bright, mouth uncertain. "Grandma, is this okay?" she whispered. I crouched to her height. "It's food," I said. "People will eat and they'll talk." "That's what parties do." Victor cornered the manager and tried to turn impatience into authority. "You must have something, anything," he demanded. "Cold canapes, a cheese board. We're paying for this room." The manager's professionalism did not crack. "Sir, the kitchen needs confirmation and time. We receive neither. I can offer basic service and help you present what you have." Victor glared as if service were an insult and stomped off to call another number louder, as though volume could invent a contract. At the far doors, a familiar silhouette paused inside the velvet rope. Eleanor Wu, precise in charcoal, walked 2 executives through the level for another event. She took in the pizza on crystal, the nervous laughter, the bare tables, and the daughter wearing composure like a too-tight dress. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. She gave the faintest nod, acknowledgement without announcement, and moved on, stride even, expression unreadable to everyone but me. Diana grabbed a slice and tried to turn it into charm. "Who doesn't love a little fun?" she said, posing while grease streaked a napkin embroidered with the hotel's crest. The joke did not land. A man by the window murmured, "My kid's birthday did this better," and his companion shushed him too late. Someone asked where to place gifts. A server gestured toward a bare table, then hurried back with a cloth to soften the sight. Sauce touched linen and bloomed into small red moons. The first delivery was not the last. Boxes of fries arrived with salt, glittering like frost. Paper. Cups joined the stemware, and sodas hissed when opened, absurdly loud beneath the chandeliers. I helped a server decant cola into flutes so the room could pretend to itself. The image was so exact, amber bubbles climbing tall glass, that for a moment I felt the ache you feel when someone is trying very hard to be gracious with too little. People began telling the story to themselves as they ate it. "It's a theme," one guest declared. "Urban chic." Another said, "I heard the original caterer canceled in protest." The lies worked like gauze, thin, not healing, but covering the sight. I stood at the edge with the cool of a column at my back and watched my daughter's performance loosen into something almost human. She thanked the delivery boy, mispronouncing his name but looking him in the eye, a small mercy taught by embarrassment. Emily returned with a plate assembled with careful pride, a modest salad rescued from the staff fridge, a neat slice of pizza, 2 grapes rolling toward the rim. "For you," she said. I took it, my throat tight. "For us," I answered, and we shared the plate on a windowsill, 2 conspirators of kindness. Outside, taxis stitched yellow thread across the avenue. Inside, the chandeliers burned like indifferent stars. By late afternoon, the room found a rhythm, not the elegant choreography Diana had imagined, but a looser, truer movement. Clusters of conversation, servers passing with quiet efficiency, laughter settling into warmth instead of nerves. Yet everything gleamed with the wrongness that birthed it. Grease fingerprints on crystal, cardboard stacked behind a velvet curtain, a sign reading "No outside food" turned discreetly to face the wall. The manager checked in once more. "Would you like us to plate the remaining slices with greens?" he asked. "Yes," I said softly. "Let people feel taken care of." Victor returned with a plastic smile and announced a playful twist on tradition. People clapped because clapping is a language that keeps embarrassment from speaking. Diana lifted her chin and pretended the evening was hers again, then flinched when a fresh box slid across the linen and left an oil shadow behind it. When the last box closed and the cloches were polished again, I stepped away from my column and drew a breath that tasted like oregano and resolve. Across the room, Diana laughed too loudly at something no one had said, and Victor counted tips he had not earned as if money could polish failure. My phone lit. A new message blinked from a number I knew by heart. I saw enough. "Let's talk Monday." I slipped the phone away and watched the room settle into the story it had made of itself. I did not rescue anyone. I would not. I stayed long enough to memorize the picture. Pizza on crystal, cola in flutes, a daughter smiling so hard her face might crack, a granddaughter steadying herself beside a woman who refused to disappear. Then I turned toward the doors, carrying nothing. The revolving glass breathed cool air as I stepped out, and behind me the laughter thinned, the way laughter does when it finally hears itself. By the next morning, the story had already grown legs longer than anyone in that ballroom could imagine. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand, not with Diana's frantic calls this time, but with news alerts and messages from colleagues. Pictures of pizza slices balanced on crystal plates glittered across social media. Some posts mocked gently, others savaged without mercy, but all of them carried Diana's name like confetti scattered on asphalt. Hashtags sprouted overnight: gala meltdown, crystal pizza, high society, low effort. I scrolled through them with quiet hands, watching how quickly humiliation becomes a spectacle when people smell arrogance in the air. Neighbors whispered before I even left the house. Mrs. Hargrove, who once eyed me over hedges as if I were nothing more than free labor with a lawnmower, stopped me at the mailbox. "Such a shame," she said, her tone steeped in satisfaction. "All that grandeur reduced to cardboard. People are saying your daughter forgot to pay the caterer." I met her gaze, steady and unflinching, and said nothing. Silence unsettled her, more than defense. She shifted on her porch step and finally muttered, "Well, I suppose every family has its surprises." Her smile thinned, and she went back inside. I walked away with the first taste of how revenge sometimes spreads without a hand guiding it. By noon, gossip had bloomed through every circle Diana prized. Texts flew from one so-called friend to another. A designer I knew from years past posted a picture of the chandelier with the caption, "When elegance meets takeout." The comments underneath multiplied, strangers laughing at the absurdity, acquaintances adding sly remarks about Diana's obsession with appearances. What began as whispers twisted into open ridicule. People who once smiled at her parties now delighted in her stumble. Meanwhile, my inbox filled with a different tone. Colleagues sent messages of admiration cloaked as curiosity. "Heard about last night," one executive wrote. "If you're free, let's discuss collaboration." We need leadership that understands resilience. Eleanor's message arrived not long after, short and unmistakably clear. "I saw everything. You have my respect. Monday, let's finalize." I read her words again and again, each time feeling a steadier kind of vindication. Not because my daughter was crumbling, but because someone who mattered recognized me without disguise. Victor, I heard, tried to spin the disaster. He told his contacts that the hotel staff had sabotaged them, that a delivery strike had ruined their plans. But the photos told another story, one that no excuse could repaint. Guests themselves had become the reporters, and their words spread faster than any statement Victor could craft. Diana tried to post a smiling picture with Emily the morning after, captioned "Blessed beyond measure." The comments were ruthless. "Where's the catering? Did you save us a slice? Blessed with Domino's?" She deleted it within an hour, but screenshots live longer than shame. In the grocery store, I passed two women whispering in the produce aisle. They didn't notice me at first. "Can you believe she thought no one would notice?" one said. "Pizza at the Hilton, imagine." When they finally saw me, they flushed and stammered, but I simply placed apples in my basket and moved on. For years, I had been invisible. Now my daughter's scandal had made me suddenly visible, though no one yet understood who I truly was. That evening, Emily called me from her room. Her voice was small but clear. "Grandma, kids at school are talking." "They said Mom's party was on the internet," I told her gently. "People talk when they see something unusual. It doesn't mean you should carry their words." She hesitated. "Were you embarrassed?" I thought about it, about the sting of seeing Diana's name dragged across screens, about the relief of no longer being the only one carrying the truth. "No, sweetheart," I said. I was not embarrassed. Sometimes the truth shows itself in ways we don't plan. What matters is what we do. After as night fell, the city itself seemed to hum with the story. A taxi driver mentioned it on the radio. A news anchor laughed through a segment. Even the doorman at my office building raised his brows when I walked in, murmuring, "Heard about that gala?" I only nodded and kept walking. I didn't need to add my voice. The world was already speaking for me, louder than I ever could. By the time I went to bed, Diana's name was no longer just hers. It was a headline, a meme, a cautionary tale of vanity undone. The gossip had slipped through every crack in her carefully built facade, and there was no pulling it back. I closed my eyes, knowing the world had shifted, and for once, I hadn't lifted a finger to push it. By the second day, Diana realized the gossip would not fade on its own. Headlines had lingered too long, neighbors whispered too loudly, and even Victor's colleagues had begun forwarding the photos like they were tabloid treasures. I heard from a friend of a friend that Diana had hired a public relations firm overnight, convinced they could scrub the stains with enough polish. She posted a carefully worded statement online. "We regret the catering mishap at our private celebration. Due to my mother's confusion with contracts, arrangements were not secured. We thank our guests for their good humor." She thought the sentence elegant, but I knew it for what it was, an attempt to bury herself in my shadow again. The statement landed like a stone in water, rippling outward until it reached every corner of the city. Journalists pounced with delight. Some ran side-by-side comparisons, her post against photographs of delivery boys, carrying greasy boxes past chandeliers. Commenters circled the phrase "my mother's confusion" like vultures. "Confused enough to call Domino's?" one wrote. "Confused but paid the bill, right?" another chimed in. Screenshots of her deleted comments surfaced again, undercutting the narrative she tried to stitch. Victor doubled down, telling colleagues that I had grown forgetful, that age had blurred my memory, and that their humiliation was an unfortunate byproduct of my decline. The words reached me through acquaintances who did not know where to place their sympathy. Some hinted at concern, others smiled with pity, but most already knew the truth. They had seen me at board tables sharp as glass, negotiating contracts worth more than Victor's entire practice. The dissonance between his claims and my reputation only widened the cracks. By midweek, a local paper published a biting piece, "From Gala to Gaff, When High Society Orders Takeout." They quoted anonymous guests describing the spectacle. One said it was surreal, wine glasses and grease stains. Another admitted her mother stood in the corner like she knew something we didn't. The article never mentioned my name, but the omission itself sparked questions. Who was the mother? What did she know? The silence around me became louder than Diana's explanations. I watched it all from my office window, scrolling through headlines with a calm I had not known in years. Marcus came in holding a copy of the paper and smirked. "They're trying very hard to make you the villain." I looked at the lines again, then set the paper aside. "Let them," I said. "The story has its own truth. It doesn't need my defense." He nodded, understanding that silence can sometimes be the sharpest answer. At home, the phone rang incessantly. Diana's voice filled every message with desperation dressed as command. "Call me back." "We can fix this. You need to clarify. People think you ruined everything." I didn't return a single call. Each voicemail stacked into a tower of panic she had built for herself. The higher it grew, the more precarious it became. By Friday, even her allies had begun to retreat. Invitations dried up. The boutique that once offered her discounts reposted a meme of pizza under chandeliers without mentioning her name but leaving no doubt. Victor's clients pulled away quietly, citing scheduling conflicts. The spin had failed, and the attempt to drag me down with her had only spotlighted her fall. I sat at my desk that evening, a cup of tea warming my hands, and thought of how many years I had feared her disapproval. Now she was the one scrambling for approval in a world that refused to hand it back. I did not rejoice, not in the way she might have if our roles had reversed. Instead, I felt a steady weight lift, as if I had been carrying her expectations on my back and finally set them down on the ground. The truth had surfaced, not because I shouted it, but because she tried too hard to bury it. When the tea cooled, I placed the cup aside and opened my calendar. Monday's meeting with Eleanor and the board stared back at me, a reminder that while Diana scrambled to rewrite a story, I was preparing to step fully into mine. Monday arrived with a blue sky that pretended the weekend had not happened. I rode the elevator to the 28th floor of Eleanor Wu's headquarters with my briefcase at my feet and a steady breath in my chest. Marcus stood beside me reading notes on his tablet. "Board at 9, then private debrief," he said. "You slept?" I nodded. "Enough," I said, and meant it. I had slept inside my choice and woken lighter. Eleanor's assistant greeted us in a lobby that smelled faintly of jasmine tea. Glass walls framed the city like a living chart. We passed photographs of ribbon cuttings and entered a small lounge. When Eleanor stepped in, she wore charcoal and a single strand of pearls. Her handshake was warm, her eyes alert. "Before we talk projections," she said, pouring tea, "I have to tell you about the most bizarre party I saw this weekend." She set cups on coasters. A birthday gala that tried to be an opera and turned into improvisation. Pizza on crystal, cola in flutes, staff performing miracles while the hostess smiled like a mask. She laughed softly. It would have been charming if it had known itself. I felt a tremor in my hands and folded them in my lap. "New York always offers a spectacle," I said. "Sometimes it stages one for us." Marcus glanced at me because he knows the currents beneath my voice. I offered nothing more. Silence can be the cleanest answer in rooms that value restraint. Eleanor set her cup down. The hostess kept insisting everything was planned. Her husband performed entitlement like a sport. Guests were gracious, but you could feel the room thinking. She tilted her head. "The manager deserves a raise." I wanted to applaud him. Marcus chuckled. "We should hire him," he said. Eleanor smiled and turned the story by a degree. Her name was Diana, she added. Pretty, well-dressed, brittle around the edges the way people get when their lives are built on borrowed scaffolding. She looked at me, curious but not prying. Do you know that type? I do, I said. The city glittered beyond the glass, full of people walking toward meetings that would change them. She lifted a folder. I asked at the desk out of professional curiosity, she said. It was not one of our hotels, but service fascinates me wherever it happens. They said the hostess had assumed someone else would handle the work. That is always the most expensive assumption. Her gaze rested on my face. Funny thing, though. The last name matched yours before you changed it professionally. Whitfield common enough, but still interesting. For a breath, I watched a gull ride the wind between towers. The city loves coincidences, I answered. Sometimes they are not coincidences at all. Eleanor waited without pressing. The quiet stretched like the pause before a conductor lifts her hand. I let it breathe. Then I offered the simplest truth available. She is my daughter. Marcus did not move. Eleanor's eyes did not widen. Respect makes reactions small. She nodded once and poured more tea. I thought as much, she said. The resemblance flickered in a photograph I was shown. I did not want to assume, and I certainly did not want to embarrass you. She handed me a linen napkin. Families are complicated. Excellence should not have to apologize for them. The room shifted lightly, not with pity, but with alignment. Outside, a crane swung a pane of glass toward a new facade. Inside, Eleanor flipped to the next page. Your deck is stronger than the last draft, she said, business returning like the tide. The phase strategy for international growth respects both our brand and our cash flow. The board will respond to that. She glanced up. Will today be comfortable for you? I am at work, I said. Work is where I am most myself. That was true before the gala and truer after. Marcus slid printouts across the table, and we reviewed timing, benchmarks, and the language for the opening statement. We tuned a sentence until it fit like a tailored sleeve. We trimmed a chart until it carried its own weight. Conversation settled into the rhythm I love, intelligence moving between people the way a well-set table passes plates without clatter. When we finished, Eleanor closed the folder and studied me. You stood at that party, she said. You could have saved it. You did not, I met her gaze. Sometimes rescue is the least kind thing, I said. Sometimes the empty room is the only mirror that tells the truth. She considered that, and then smiled in a way that reached the muscles around her eyes. We will work well together, she said. Her assistant knocked and announced the board's arrival. We stood. In the hallway, footsteps converged like streams toward a river. Eleanor walked beside me close enough for only me to hear. Whatever your daughter says in the papers, she cannot name what she does not know, she said. You are safe here. Your reputation is intact. We paused at the double doors. I thought of Emily, of the small plate we shared on the windowsill, and of the city that had turned Diana's evening into a cautionary tale. I thought of the decades I spent being useful, and of the precise day I chose to be true. The doors opened. The river of footsteps became a sea of faces. Eleanor gestured me forward. After you, she said. I walked into the boardroom and felt the hush that follows expectation. A long table waited with water poured and pens aligned, a quiet promise that work done well becomes its own shelter. I took my seat at the head, reserved for a consultant who was not anyone's servant, and for the first time in years, I did not feel the need to explain a single thing. The boardroom filled the way a tide comes in, quietly, with purpose. Directors took their seats, jackets unbuttoned, pens aligned beside leather folders. I felt the stillness I always feel before important work, that clean hum inside the chest that says you have what you need. Eleanor opened the meeting with a brief nod. Thank you for being on time. We have a single agenda item this morning, the growth strategy presented by Aurora Consulting. She turned to me. Olivia, the room is yours. I stood and began where truth begins, with clarity and numbers that can stand in daylight. The first slide mapped the current portfolio across regions. The second overlaid occupancy, seasonality, and labor volatility. The third proposed a phased rollout that kept capital disciplined without starving innovation. I spoke of markets that pretend to be mature and are only asleep, of micro-renovations that change guest behavior without closing floors, of technology that humanizes service rather than replacing it. Questions came fast and clean. What does year 2 cash flow look like under a soft recession? Which city will punish us first if our read is wrong? Where is the margin of safety? I answered each, not to impress, but because I had sat with the problems long enough to respect them. Marcus joined when I nodded. He explained the operations cadence and the scorecards we would monitor weekly. His voice steadied the table the way it always steadies me. When we reached the risk section, I did not pretend uncertainty could be erased. I named it, boxed it, and showed how we would carry it without letting it carry us. The directors leaned forward. One, a former airline executive, tapped his pen. "You're asking us to grow without grand openings," he said. "You're asking us to let excellence speak at volume 3 and win anyway." I smiled. "Excellence is loud when it repeats itself," I said. The room softened, not with ease, but with agreement. Eleanor waited until the last slide rested on the screen. A simple timeline, months instead of quarters. Not because we were rushing, but because attention is a kind of capital. "Thank you," she said. She turned to the board. "You know our alternatives. You know what we can buy and what we can build. You also know what happens when a company confuses noise with momentum." She set her hands flat on the table. "I recommend we approve the plan in full and engage Aurora immediately." The chair cleared his throat. "Any objections?" None came. There was only the sound of pens and the soft rasp of paper as signatures found their places. A folder slid toward me. I signed where tabs flagged my name. The room exhaled. The quiet that followed did not feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning that respected the work it would require. Eleanor closed her copy and looked at me across the table, something like gratitude bright in her eyes. "One more thing," she said, and lifted her phone. "There is a rumor floating in the city that misidentifies the author of the mess I saw on Saturday night. I prefer to clear the air when truth is cheap and confusion is expensive." She pressed a button and waited. The speaker chimed, then rang. A familiar voice answered, brittle with exhaustion and polish. "This is Diana." "Good morning," Eleanor said. "This is Eleanor Wu." We were both at a birthday event this weekend. A beat of silence opened, then Diana gathered herself. "Miss Wu, what a surprise. I'm so grateful you came. We had, unfortunately, a catering issue due to my mother's confusion. I hope the improvisation didn't offend your taste." Eleanor's tone did not change. "I dislike inaccuracies more than I dislike improvisation. Your mother is in the room with my board. She is not confused. She just co-authored a strategy we have approved unanimously. We are signing today." The line went quiet, and I could hear the sound of Diana trying to find her footing on a floor that had moved. I didn't realize," she said at last. "You're saying my mother—" "I'm saying Olivia Whitfield leads Aurora Consulting," Eleanor replied, "and when it comes to our growth, she is the person I answer to. Today, she is my boss." The word landed in the room without theatrics, simple and exact. Directors glanced toward me with professional courtesy rather than surprise. Marcus kept his eyes on the table, the hint of a smile tucked where only I could see it. On the other end, Diana managed a laugh that sounded like glass. "Well, that's unexpected." Eleanor spared her nothing soft. What is unexpected is a public story that blames a woman's age to hide a failure of basic responsibility. I don't accept that in my hotels or in my partnerships. She looked at me, and her voice warmed. You should know who your mother is. Many people do. I stepped closer to the speaker. I did not offer comfort or explain history. Diana, I said, steady as a handrail, I'm in a meeting. We'll speak another time. Silence pooled, then she murmured, Of course, and the line clicked off. Eleanor placed the phone face down as if putting away a tool she hopes not to use again. The chair leaned back. Well, he said, that's the clearest due diligence I've seen conducted in real time. Laughter moved around the table, quick and human. Papers shuffled. The assistants re-entered with a tray of coffee and a small plate of almond cookies that looked like a blessing. We signed the final page. Eleanor capped her pen and extended her hand to me. Welcome aboard, she said. Let's get to work. As we posed briefly for a photo to mark the agreement, Eleanor's communications director stepped in. We have a pending feature running this month, she said lightly. A publication reached out for comment on your appointment as lead advisor. They also asked about the weekend incident. We have declined to discuss family. We will let competence be the headline. I nodded. There was nothing to add. Competence travels farther than gossip when you let it walk. The board drifted toward other meetings. Marcus collected copies, neat as always. I looked out through the glass at a skyline that had watched me carry 2 lives for too long. In one life, I had been useful and unseen. In this one, I was exact. Eleanor touched my elbow as the room emptied. You stood where a lot of people would have rushed in to fix, she said. You chose not to, and because of that, an entire organization now understands your value. That is leadership. I thought of Emily's steady little plate on the windowsill, of the manager's patient hands, of the chandelier reflecting cardboard like it was a mirror. I thought of my late husband telling me once that dignity is a room you must furnish yourself. I looked at the signed contract, weighty and ordinary. Thank you, I said to Eleanor, for the room and the work. She smiled. For the work most of all. We walked into the corridor together, the city bright and unbothered beyond the glass. I carried my briefcase lightly. The door closed behind us, and it sounded like a hinge turning toward a future that had been waiting for me to open it. The morning after the board vote, the city felt newly washed, bright, and unforgiving. I walked to the corner bakery for coffee, and 3 different strangers glanced at me with that flicker of recognition. People wear when they think they have seen a headline walking. It was not my name they knew, it was the shape of a story, clipped and passed around until even the edges looked smooth. A business site ran my appointment beside a photo of the skyline, and colleagues forwarded it with small notes that said, "Proud of you and long overdue." I read them on the sidewalk with the steady breath of someone who has learned to accept respect without apologizing for it. By noon, the weather had turned for my daughter. Boutique partners stopped reposting her photos. A florist who once sang endearments into the phone wrote that their spring collaboration no longer aligned with brand values. The crisis firm sent a polite invoice and a notice of disengagement in the same breath. Her calendar, once a crowded vanity mirror, cleared itself like fog in sunlight. I did not call her. Silence does not mean indifference. Sometimes it is the only room where another person can hear their own thoughts. Victor's turn arrived next. A partner at his firm left a message that began with pleasantries and ended with an indefinite leave to protect client confidence. The words were legal cotton, soft enough to sound kind while absorbing the blow. I pictured him pacing his office, dialing favors that had already decided to go to voicemail. By evening, his headshot vanished from the website, replaced by a neutral gradient that looked like the absence of a man. The neighborhood noticed in its own way. At the weekly market, women who had once competed with Diana for eye contact studied radishes like rare gems. 2 peeled away and approached me with missionary smiles. "We hope your daughter is okay," one said, the way people ask after a storm has chosen the wrong house. I nodded and asked whether the berries were sweet this year. Gossip survives on nourishment. I have learned to starve it. At Emily's school, parents whispered in parking lots with the fake sympathy of people practicing lines for later. Emily slid into my car and stared at her hands until the first light. "Kids made jokes about pizza," she said softly. "I told them we shared a plate, and they stopped." I reached over and squeezed her fingers. "Sharing changes the math," I said. "It makes the story about kindness." She breathed out, the smallest victory. That afternoon, a local station aired a segment titled, "When Elegance Trips." They blurred faces and sharpened adjectives. Diana offered a gentler statement, but the anchor read it with the weary cadence of someone feeding a fire its own smoke. A reporter called me for comment. I declined and went back to work. The more I refused to let drama draft me, the more it walked itself into the quiet. Even the building where Diana held court began to turn. The concierge, who once greeted her with theatrical warmth, now offered a tempered nod, like a doctor delivering routine news. Packages arrived without the small bow the staff used to add when her name appeared. People remember how you made them feel. They repay it with interest when the currency flips. The apology came on a Thursday from a place I did not expect. Mrs. Hargrove, queen of the hedges and patron saint of neighborhood judgment, rang my bell at dusk. She held a foil-covered plate like a talisman. "Lemon squares," she announced too loudly, as if warding off embarrassment. Then she swallowed hard and began again, smaller. "I owe you an apology." I repeated things that weren't mine to repeat. I made assumptions. Her eyes were bright with the shock of her own humility. I invited her in. We sat at my kitchen table with 2 forks and the good plates. The lemon squares were too sweet by a margin, but the gesture righted the balance. "People surprised me this week," she said, smoothing her skirt that did not need smoothing. "You surprised me more." I poured tea and let her words sit where they landed. "Sometimes," I answered, "respect is just someone finally seeing what was always there." She nodded, cheeks blotched, and asked how to make it right. "Tell the truth where you told the rumor," I said. She did. 2 days later, at the neighborhood association meeting, she stood up in a folding chair circle and did exactly that. "I misjudged our neighbor," she said, voice trembling but firm. "I mistook quiet for weakness and spread stories that were not mine. I am sorry heads turned toward me like weather vanes. I did not stand. I simply inclined my head. Forgiveness, when it is ready, does not need applause." That evening, a magazine posted a feature about our partnership. The photograph captured me in profile, speaking to a room where everyone else leaned forward. The caption mentioned decades of strategy and an uncommon ability to make numbers sound like hope. Comments collected beneath it, simple and clean. "Congratulations. About time." The contrast with the other headlines felt almost too neat, like 2 rails running in opposite directions. One belonged to work, the other belonged to noise. I will not pretend that watching the tide turn brought me no satisfaction. It did. It also brought a quieter awareness I had not expected. A public fall does not teach the right lesson unless a private one lands after it. I could watch Diana's invitations evaporate, but if she did not examine the impulse that expected me to carry her life, the evaporation would only make her thirsty for the wrong water. Consequence without reflection is only a pause between reruns. The next day, Emily asked if we could bake. We measured flour and sugar while a soft rain checked the windows. Halfway through, she looked up and said, "If I mess up, will you still let me try again?" I laughed, surprised by the precision of the question. "Always," I said. "That's how we learn." She nodded, satisfied, and cracked an egg on the counter with more confidence than skill. We cleaned the spill together. When the lemon squares cooled, I wrapped half and carried them across the street to Mrs. Hargrove's porch. Emily rang the bell and waited for the door to open. It felt right that the gift should pass through her hands. On Friday evening, I walked past the hotel. Another event glowed behind the same chandeliers. Musicians tuned, florists fussed, staff moved like well-rehearsed kindness. No one knew me in that lobby. No one needed to. I watched the door sweep open and closed for strangers who would never understand the story the room had already told. Then I turned toward home, passing a newsstand where a tabloid headline tried one last joke. I let it pass like weather. By the weekend, Victor had retreated to a rented sublet near the river, and Diana filled her feed with photos of coffee cups and morning light that looked borrowed. Invitations still come to people who are generous in the famine. They stop for people who are only hungry. The circle had noticed the difference. A small thing shifted in me then, a hinge I had not oiled in years. I would meet my daughter when she was ready to speak plainly. Until then, I would hold the boundary that finally held me. When I lay down that night, the house was quiet in the right way, not the brittle quiet after a slammed door, but the deep quiet after putting things back where they belong. I thought of my husband's steady hands and the letter I had tucked away in my dresser drawer, the one I had not allowed myself to read in months. Tomorrow, I decided, I would open it. Some words deserve to arrive when the noise has finally tired itself out. I took the letter from the dresser drawer where I keep what still smells like him: cedar, paper, a trace of Sunday cologne. The envelope had softened at the corners from years of postponing courage. I carried it to the kitchen and set it beside a mug of hot water. He had dated it 9 months before he died. The handwriting steadied me. Measured, patient, the script of a man who never rushed. Liv, it began, the name he saved for our quiet hours. If you're reading this, I am likely gone or going. I don't want the last of my words to be hospital sounds. I want them to be a room you can enter when the world is loud. I sat down. The page carried a gentleness that made my throat ache. You have always given more than you kept, he wrote. I've watched you make a home out of thin days and bruised evenings, and still open the door to those who arrived empty-handed. But loving people does not require disappearing for them. Please remember that he wrote about small things, the way I hummed while folding towels, the precision I brought to any plan, the steadiness I keep when everything else shakes. You see around corners, he wrote. You tell the truth without throwing it like a stone. I loved you for that before I knew how useful it would be. Then he wrote about Diana carefully, as if stepping through glass. Our girl is bright and hungry, he said. She learned early that attention feels like air. If I have a fault, it is that I laughed when she demanded center stage. A father can mistake applause for wisdom. If she grows to confuse love with labor, you cannot fix it by working harder. Step back. Let life teach what we could not. I pressed my hand to my mouth. The kettle clicked as it cooled. He had named what I knew and would not say. He offered permission I did not realize I needed. You're not responsible for the stories other people tell about you, he continued. You are responsible for your boundaries, your kindness, and your rest. When you keep those, truth finds its own chair at the table. The next page turned practical. He listed account numbers and a contact at the bank, a friend he trusted to steady me if I needed guidance. If you ever feel cornered, he wrote, remember that money is a tool, not a leash. Use it to open doors for yourself, not to prop up someone else's stage. He reminded me where the cabin deed is stored and urged me to visit in autumn when the maples go red. A person remembers herself among trees, he wrote. Go when the city confuses you. A photograph slipped from the fold. We were on the ferry, younger, wind-tangled, laughing at something I can no longer name. On the back, he had scribbled, look how the water holds us even when we lean. I traced the ink with a finger that shook. The closing paragraphs undid me. If Diana asks you to fund her shine at the cost of your dignity, he wrote, tell her no and make yourself tea. If she calls you cruel, do not argue. Kindness and compliance are not the same. One honors love, the other buries it. Leave room for her to grow and refuse to be the soil she steps on. Tears arrived quietly, the way evening slips into a room where a lamp has not yet been switched on. I let them fall. He had loved me in the precise way I needed, not with demands, not with rescues, but with vision. He had seen the road I stood on and drawn a small map at the edge of it. When you doubt yourself, he wrote, read this and remember that I married a woman I respected. I would do it again tomorrow, and if tomorrow is not ours, let the memory of that promise guard your sleep. I folded the letter along its soft creases and held it to my chest. The rain thinned to a mist. I poured the hot water and felt my breath settle. In the living room, the clock sounded less like a hammer and more like a heartbeat. I understood that forgiveness for myself had been waiting behind an envelope. I wrote a reply I would never send. I told him the house was quiet in the right way. I told him our granddaughter was brave, that she had learned to steady her plate in a room with no table set. I told him I had stood at a party and chosen not to save it, and that the choice had saved me instead. I promised to go to the cabin when the trees begin to burn with color, to sit by the lake and remember that water holds us when we lean. Before I put the letter away, I copied one line on a card and slid it into my wallet. Respect is non-negotiable. The phrase was not his, but it lived inside his sentences, and I wanted it near the place where I carry what I have earned. I returned the envelope to the drawer and opened the window an inch. Fresh air entered, cool and clean, carrying the smell of rain and something like beginning. The phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. I brewed another mug and set 2 cups on the table, speaking to the empty chair across from me as if the distance between worlds were only a veil of steam. I heard you, I said. I'm ready. Thank you. She came to my door at dusk with the look of someone who had run out of corners. I opened the door and let her in. She sat at the kitchen table without asking, fingers worrying the seam of her sleeve. Mother, she began, and the word tripped. I need your help. Her face had collapsed at the edges. It's worse than I thought. People won't let it go. Victor says you can fix this. You always fix things. I poured water into 2 glasses and set one in front of her. What do you need? I asked. She stared at the glass as if a script might rise from it. A statement, she said, from you. Tell the papers the hotel failed us. Say I was misled. Say it wasn't my fault. Her voice thinned. Please. I sat across from her and let the quiet stand between us. No, I said. The word was soft, but it did not move. She blinked, not understanding a world in which my refusal could live. You would let me drown? She whispered. After everything I've done for our family? I could have listed the evenings I carried her life while mine went breathless, the checks I wrote, the favors I begged. I didn't. I will not lie for you, I said, and I will not be blamed for choices you made. She flinched. Then what do you want? Not what I want, I answered. What I require if our relationship is to stop bruising us both. I took a card I had written that morning and placed it between us. 5 conditions, I said. If you can meet them, we can begin again. She stared at the card as if it might bite. I read the first. You will speak to me with respect. Requests, not orders. No shouting, no names meant to belittle. If I say no, you will accept it without punishment. I continued. Second, money is off the table. I will not fund events, debts, or image. You will not use my name, my card, or my credit without permission. If you mention me publicly, it will be truthful. I paused. Third, time and access. No more unannounced visits. You will call, and you will accept that I may not be available. Fourth, Emily is not leverage. You will not ask her to carry messages, and you will not withhold her to force my compliance. She may call me whenever she wishes, and I will be steady for her. Her eyes shone. I read the last. 5th, repair. You will correct the story you spread. You will apologize to the hotel manager and the staff you blamed. You will book therapy and attend weekly for 6 months. We will sit with a counselor together at least twice. I will not negotiate these. She looked smaller than she had since childhood. You're asking me to confess, she said, as if the word were a wound. I am asking you to be responsible, I replied. You built a stage on borrowed planks and expected me to hold it up. I'm done lifting. Her jaw trembled. You have always enjoyed being the strong one, she said. People admire you. Dad admired you. The last sentence thinned. She pressed her palm to her eyes. When I was 9 and my school held science night, you stood in front of my trifold and explained my project better than I did. Teachers praised you. I heard them. I felt like air next to you. She dropped her hand. I wanted you smaller so I could feel big. You didn't need me smaller, I said. You needed to grow. She nodded once, angry at herself. I'm tired, she said. Tired of pretending I'm effortless. Tired of calling you at midnight because I never learned to plan in daylight. Tired of seeing you and feeling the mirror point at me. The words came without polish. I am asking you to help me, but I don't know what help is. Help is boundaries, I said. Help is refusing to protect you from the lesson that will save you. I slid the card closer. Can you agree? She traced the edge with a shaking finger. The apology, she said. Public? Where you told the story, I answered. Not for spectacle. For repair. She swallowed. And therapy? Yes. I thought of the counselor who had taught me to sit with discomfort until it turned into knowledge. There's a woman I trust. I'll share her number. Her shoulders slumped, then straightened. And if I fail, then I will love you from a distance, I said. I won't punish or plead. I will simply be elsewhere. She let out a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. You make everything sound simple and unbearable at the same time. Clarity often does, I said. At last she drew a breath that sounded like a beginning. I will correct the story, she said. I will apologize to the staff. I will not use your name or money. I will stop arriving without warning. I will ask for help like a grown woman. She touched the final line. I will book therapy. Will you come to the first session? Yes, I said. I will sit with you. I will not carry you. She rose to leave and then hesitated, the old habit of demanding scratching at her mouth. She swallowed it. Thank you, she said instead. At the threshold, she turned back. I was jealous, she said, not of your work, of your calm. You always seemed whole. I didn't know how to be. You are not a broken thing, I said. You learned a crooked way to stand. We can unlearn it. When the door closed, the house held a different quiet. I washed the 2 glasses and set them to dry. In the living room, I wrote the date on my calendar beneath a single word, boundary. Diana called at 9 and said she had booked the counselor. I arrived early, sat in a quiet room, and waited. When Diana entered, she looked like someone who had finally set down a suitcase she'd pretended was featherlight. The counselor welcomed us with the steadiness that makes truth less frightening. We spoke in turns. Diana described the party plainly. She said she blamed me because blaming me had always worked. It bought her time and kept her image intact. She had treated my love like a faucet, my silence as guarantee. The counselor asked what she feared if she stopped demanding. That no one will choose me, she whispered. When it was my turn, I talked about years of useful invisibility and how care without respect corrodes the giver. I said the 5 conditions were not punishments but rails we could walk without falling. The counselor asked for commitments. Diana promised to return next week and to write a public correction before noon. I promised to keep my boundary even when it shook. We crossed the street to a cafe and sat in the corner. She drafted the statement on her phone. I misled. You, she typed. The hotel and staff were not at fault. I failed to confirm contracts and payments. I blamed my mother to protect my image. I'm sorry to the staff, the guests, and to my mother. I will repair what I can and do the rest in private. She added a line about calling the manager and posted it. Then we went to the hotel. The floor manager appeared with the same clipboard and patient dignity. Diana met his eyes. I'm sorry, she said. This was my responsibility. He accepted it and brought over 2 staff members who had carried the heaviest chaos. She apologized to them as well. On the way out, she asked how to contribute to the staff fund. He gave her the link. By late afternoon, the apology moved across the city, not as gossip, but as a correction. Some people mocked anyway. Others replied with short, decent words. I breathed easier, not because the crowd approved, but because my daughter finally spoke in a grammar that repairs. Victor arrived at 6, with outrage already lit. Take it down, he said, shrugging off his coat as if the room were the offender. You're admitting liability. You should say the hotel botched it. Diana stood in the hallway and did not move for his weather. I'm telling the truth, she said. It costs less in the end. He turned on me. This is your theater. Therapy, apologies, the act. I shook my head. This is adulthood. Her hands trembled and then steadied. I used people, she said. I won't do it again. His phone buzzed. He glanced down, went pale, and turned away to answer. He hissed into the receiver, then stood very still. When he hung up, he tried for casual and missed. A clerical question, he said. Minor. My phone pinged seconds later. A colleague in compliance forwarded a notice. An inquiry into Victor's firm for duplicate reimbursements and personal dinners expensed as client development. There were whispers about a charitable fund used like a slush pool. The message asked whether I had comment. I put the phone face down and watched my daughter's face learn a new kind of stillness. Is it true? She asked. Victor went to anger because it was closer than remorse. Everyone pads, he said. That's how business breathes. Diana shook her head. Not the business I want. He pointed at me again. This is her. Her friends. Her network. I didn't lift a finger, I said. He sneered. Enjoy your high ground. Victor, Diana said, voice low and exact. We're done. He stared at her like she'd chosen a foreign language. You don't mean that. She picked up the card with my 5 conditions and slid it into her pocket like a note to herself. I do, she said. I choose a life I don't have to hide from Emily. He scoffed, muttered a threat about lawyers, and left with more noise than doors require. We stood listening to the building settle. Diana pressed her palms to her eyes and laughed once, surprised by the sound. I thought change would feel like fireworks, she said. It feels like a muscle unclenching. I poured water. Bodies tell the truth when we let them. She texted the counselor to confirm next week's session and forwarded the receipt from her contribution to the staff fund. Then she asked if I could pick up Emily from rehearsal on Thursday. Ask her yourself, I wrote, adding Emily to the thread. Hi, Mom, Emily typed. Can we get dumplings after? Yes, Diana answered. We'll celebrate honest food. The phrasing made me smile. It was exactly right. That night, I washed the dishes and set the calendar on the counter. In a square I had left blank for months, I wrote 2 words, beginning again. Then I placed the pen down and felt the house loosen. Outside, the streetlight sewed a small circle of gold on the sidewalk. Inside, the clock sounded less like a hammer and more like a heartbeat. There would be consequences for Victor, visible and loud. But in our kitchen, the air felt breathable. My daughter was doing the work that cannot be borrowed, and I was keeping the promise I made to myself. Tomorrow, I would plan a dinner that marked the change without parading it, a table where grace and order could sit together and be simple. I knew who would come, and I knew what I would say to the child who always notices. Respect is non-negotiable. I hosted the dinner on a Friday evening, the kind that made the city hum just outside the windows, while the penthouse glowed with its own stillness. My team from Aurora had transformed the dining room into something both elegant and calm. Long tables stretched under soft light, set with linen, crystal, and silver, polished to a gentle gleam. The staff moved with quiet precision, the same way I had seen them serve foreign dignitaries and corporate leaders. This time, the guests were not investors or clients, but my daughter, my granddaughter, and a handful of colleagues who had stood with me. When Diana arrived, she stopped at the threshold. She had been served her whole life, but never like this. Never with the deliberate grace that makes a person understand where they stand in the room. She looked at the table, then at me, then at the staff who waited for her to sit. Her mouth opened as if to speak, then closed. For once she had no script. She sat slowly, careful with the napkin, careful with her eyes. Emily rushed to me, arms circling my waist. "Grandma, it's beautiful," she whispered. "It feels like a holiday." I kissed the top of her head. "It is," I said, "the holiday of beginning again." She slid into her seat, her small back straight, taking it all in. Marcus opened the evening with a toast, professional but warm. "To dignity that does not fade," he said, raising his glass. The team echoed softly. Diana lifted hers a beat later, hands unsteady, but she drank. Courses followed one by one, each plate arriving with silent choreography. I watched Diana realize what service feels like when it is born of respect instead of demand. She shifted in her chair, and I could see her swallow the understanding like something both sharp and nourishing. Midway through the meal, I reached into a small velvet box and brought out the ring that had passed through generations of women in our family. It caught the light in a quiet flame. I turned to Emily. "This is for you," I said. "It is not payment, not decoration. It is a promise. Respect is non-negotiable. Carry it and you will always know who you are." Her eyes widened and her fingers trembled as I slid it onto her hand. She whispered, "I'll take care of it, Grandma." Diana pressed her napkin to her lips, unable to stop her tears. The table was still for a moment, the kind of stillness that makes memory. Then conversation resumed, gentler than before. Diana leaned across to Emily and asked about her school project. She listened, truly listened, and I watched the child brighten. It was the smallest sign, but it was real. At dessert, Diana cleared her throat. "Mother," she said, her voice soft and plain, "I know I have used you. I know I have hurt you. Tonight I see something I never saw before. Service that honors, not diminishes. I want to learn that she looked at Marcus and then at me. If Aurora has a place for someone willing to work at the bottom and learn how to stand, I will take it." Marcus raised an eyebrow, waiting for my cue. I met Diana's eyes. "Respect begins with honesty," I said. "If you come as an employee, not as my daughter. No shortcuts, no favors. Do you understand?" She nodded. "I do." Emily squeezed her hand as if sealing the promise. The staff served coffee and petits fours. Outside the windows, the city glittered like 1,000 unopened letters. Inside, the air felt altered. Weight lifted, space widened. My daughter sat at the table I had set, not as its center, not as its tyrant, but as one of many, humbled and beginning. I leaned back and let the moment settle. For years, I had been the servant at her feasts. Tonight, I was the host and she the guest. The symmetry was complete. I did not need to say more. The work was already speaking. On Sunday morning, I walked through Central Park as the leaves began to shift into their autumn fire. The air carried that crisp edge that makes you believe change is not only possible, but necessary. Joggers passed with headphones, children tugged at balloons, and dogs chased the last of summer's shadows. I carried no briefcase, no lists, only the comfort of my own steps. For the first time in decades, I felt whole in public, unmasked and unafraid of being seen. I thought of the path I had walked to arrive here. 20 years of silence, of being called staff in my own family, of writing checks with no acknowledgement, of enduring humiliation so routine it became wallpaper. I remembered the ballroom stripped, bare, the echo of empty tables, the glint of pizza grease under chandeliers. That night had not destroyed me, it had freed me. By refusing to rescue, I had rescued myself. Eleanor's words replayed in my mind. You chose not to fix what was never yours to fix. The boardroom vote still lived in my bones, the calm of competence winning without spectacle. Contracts had been signed, deals launched, and my name carried with respect into rooms that once ignored me. I thought of Marcus steadying every plan, of colleagues who finally looked at me as I was, not as a shadow behind someone else's show. But more than business, I thought of family. Diana sitting at the table, tasting humility for the first time, not as punishment, but as nourishment. Emily's eyes shining when I placed the ring on her hand, her promise to care for it as if it were a flame. My husband's letter resting in my drawer, its wisdom already lived rather than only read. I whispered to him as I crossed the park. I listened. I said no, and I'm still standing. The city moved around me, strangers carrying their own invisible battles. I wondered how many mothers were out there, mistaking servitude for love, mistaking endurance for peace. I wished I could tell them what I had learned, that silence can heal when it is chosen, but it can wound when it is forced, that boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity. That respect is not a gift someone grants you. It is a fact you carry until others have no choice but to see it. I stopped at a bench near the pond and watched the water hold the reflection of the trees. A father lifted his child onto his shoulders. A woman read a book with her coat tucked around her. A group of teenagers laughed so loudly the geese startled. Life went on, ordinary and miraculous. I sat with it, letting the quiet around me feel like reward instead of punishment. In that stillness, I said aloud the words that had become my compass. Value doesn't need permission. Respect is non-negotiable. They were not slogans. They were the architecture of my rebirth. When I rose to walk home, the sky had softened toward evening and the city lights began to blink awake. I did not hurry. I did not fear the phone or the knock at the door. I belonged to myself, fully, finally. And that belonging was the beginning of everything else.